And we now like to welcome in the newly minted head coach of the Maryland Terrapins. He is Buzz Williams. And Buzz, first, before we get to basketball, happy 25th anniversary to you and your
Thanks.
wife. I'm curious, if somebody told you 25 years ago that in 2025 you're going to be the head coach at Maryland after taking 3 power conference programs to the NCAA tournament, Marquette, Virginia Tech, and Texas A&M, what do you think your reaction would have been?
I wouldn't have believed one syllable of that. I've been blessed way more than I deserve, not only professionally but personally. So I appreciate your kind words. It was a memorable deal. I'd never been to a vow renewal. I hadn't, to be transparent, I'd never even heard of the word. And we were going to do it, John, in year 20, but that was COVID. And so that got obviously pushed off. And I go, well, we'll just do it in year 25. Right. I just didn't know that in year 25, 50 days before the vow renewal, I would move halfway across the country. So the timing of when we moved and when our children moved and all of the different pieces that come in a transition kind of centered around the vow renewal. But I would have never thought anything would have transpired in my career the way that it has. I was a junior college manager. I was an NAIA manager, and I'm from a town that still doesn't have a stoplight. So all of this has been way more than I could have ever even dreamed.
Well, it's been a great run, and it's going to keep going at Maryland. Marquette, you go all the way to the Elite Eight. Virginia Tech, you go to the Sweet 16. Texas A&M, you win games in the NCAA tournament. As you evaluate yourself, why do you think you've been so successful as a head coach?
I think the first thing is really good players, which I think all coaches would say that. I think another thing, as I've gotten older, John, that I didn't understand when I was younger, obviously I was the head coach at the University of New Orleans in my first job 6 months after Hurricane Katrina. And there's no way that no matter how diligent you are as an assistant, there are some things that you never have an opportunity to get reps of until you become a head coach.
Sure.
And then taking the job at New Orleans, my first job after one of the worst natural disasters in our country, I didn't have any choice but to try to discern who was I going to be and what was it going to be about. And after 1 year, I resigned with a losing record. So I never thought, to be honest, that I would ever get another chance, period. But I do think in hindsight, going into year 19, I think the consistency of the staff has been maybe just as important as the character and the talent of the players. Last year on our staff, there was over 107 years that those staff members combined had been with me wherever we had lived. And a lot of that had been organic growth. 7 of those staff members were once students within the program that they started in. And so I'm kind of on that line, as you know, because you've known me most of my career. I'm not old. I'm not young. I'm somewhere in between. And I think that sometimes a lot of coaches take credit kind of in a subliminal way, but I think it's the players, and all coaches would say that, but I think the consistency of our staffs and the growth of our staffs has been a large part of the consistency of the success.
Well, you're going to need that consistency of the staff as you take over a new program in the Big Ten in this climate. How different is it taking over a program in 2025 at Maryland versus taking over Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, or Marquette?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I don't look at the internet anymore, so I don't really follow this sort of stuff. But I'm sure you've had other coaches that you do this with, and that's one thing that I haven't said publicly, and it's not because I'm trying to avoid it. It's completely different.
Yeah.
It's completely different. And it's completely different, not necessarily because of the coaches or the players or the institutions. It's just different because it's a different model that we're now working under.
Yep.
And, just like as I mentioned about the vow renewal, I know that's a specific personal category, but where can we sell a house? Can we buy a house? Where are we going to live? Where are the kids going to go to school? And as a head coach, you have to figure those things out, but you're also trying to figure out those things with your staff. And we're fortunate 9 of our staff members from Texas A&M followed us here. And so I'm familiar with their families and the process that they're going through. But when you take a job now, relative to your roster and how you're going to build, there's more complexity to it. That's not me complaining about it, but you're trying to ascertain, okay, what is right as it relates to our current roster relative to what's important in how we want to play, in who we want to be off the court. So there's more variables now, even than there was 6 years ago when I took the job at Texas A&M, 11 years ago when I took the job at Virginia Tech, and for that matter, 18 years ago when I took the job at Marquette. And so there's just a lot of different variables that until you do it, you're like, wow, this is happening at warp speed. And I feel like every decision I'm making influences the next decision.
But there is familiarity geographically because you did coach at Virginia Tech. So is it a little bit more of a transition that is seamless from a recruiting perspective because you recruited the DMV when you were at Virginia Tech and now you're the Maryland coach?
That has helped. And that has helped maybe a little bit for me, but I think it also speaks just to the relationships with the high school coaches, the grassroots coaches in this part of the country. And transparently, I stayed in somewhat of a consistent contact with a lot of those people during our time in College Station, but they've been tremendous. The former players at Maryland have been through the roof, good to all of us within the program. But then all of the coaches, whether they coach in the academic year or in the summer, we've been well received, and I'm very thankful for that because it has, to your point, given us some traction, not necessarily in the portal when we took the job in April, but just as we get into the 26 class and the 27 class, not every single call that I make or our staff makes are cold calls. Like we know you, or we know of you, and you know somebody 6 degrees removed. So that has been helpful.
Buzz, you're somebody who's always had a reverence for the great figures in the game, coaching against the great figures in the game. When you were a young coach, how did you view Gary Williams?
Yes, sir. In that vein, I for whatever reason, just because I knew that I always wanted to be a coach, I was reverent in the little country town where I grew up of every coach, not just the ones that coach me. Every sport, because I wanted to learn. I just wanted to be a coach. I didn't know, as we mentioned earlier, that it was going to be basketball for that matter, or it would turn into all of this. My high school football coach, I didn't play football, and AD, he wrote me a letter yesterday. He's 75 years old. Coach Williams was here yesterday for a couple hours spending time. He's 80 now. This morning I talked to Coach Raveling. He'll turn 88 tomorrow.
Wow.
And similar to Coach Drizel, I mentioned it the day of my press conference. I was riding Coach Drizel when I was a kid. And then as I got older, so to say, and became a coach, I was still riding him when he was the head coach at Georgia State. And I never mentioned that in the transaction of becoming the coach at Maryland. I didn't mention my relationship with Coach Drizel. I didn't mention my relationship with Coach Williams because I never start those relationships to use them to my advantage. I start them just to be reverent, as you said, to honor them, to honor the game. And I do that with 10 former coaches, either retired or fired, every month. And then when I was young, I was doing it in a more consistent way. But I know the world moves fast now, but I still think when you think of all of the lives that they've impacted and what they have given to the game to create opportunities like this for me, and without being disrespectful to your industry, even opportunities like this for you, I think a lot of that goes to what was happening when me and you, when I was young and before you were born. And to me, I just think that's the appropriate way. And maybe someday when I'm old and fired and or retired, somebody will at least give me an hour of their time and empower me to feel important.
And all of those coaches, and any coach is going to want and need a great home court advantage to try and have success, especially in a power conference. I've been doing this buzz 20 years. When the Xfinity Center jumps for a home game, it is as good as any place in college basketball. As you now try to build a program, how big is it to have that chip to potentially have a great home court advantage at your disposal?
Yeah, obviously at different places along the way, whether it's been where I've worked or whether it's been when we've played a road game, I do think that there is, I don't know how you quantify the impact of it, but it for sure does have an effect on the game. And similar to what you just said, I bet I've been told that, John, 400 times. Man. I've never experienced it.
Yeah.
But, not only have coaches told me that, donors told me that, students have told me that, but also other players have told me that. Like, Coach, that it's hype in there, it's jumping, and I'm like, I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen it. I've watched some clips, but I've never experienced it. And so I do think, a lot of these genres of conversations, it seems like not only is Maryland one of those places in the Big Ten, but it seems as though there's several other places in this league that have that same sort of, it's a really big deal. The place is shutting down. Everybody's in the arena. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be able to experience that specifically here, of course.
Well, the Big Ten is synonymous with great home court advantages. You coached in the Big East. You coached in the ACC. You coached in the SEC. How do you now, as a coach, prepare for a season in a league that you have never coached in?
Yeah, I don't know. A little bit, John, actually, before we're taping this, what I've tried to do is, like anybody else, what are you trading your time for? Right. And in what this has become, you can argue that when I was hired, it was somewhat late.
Yes.
Is it somewhat late because Coach Willard in Maryland went to the Sweet 16? Yes. Is it a week later because I was at Texas A&M and we were advancing in the tournament? Like, there are variables that are good variables.
Right.
But as it relates to the portal and some of the things that transpire, by the time you interview, by the time you get there, by the time you have the press conference, by the time you do the initial thrust of things that you have to do, and you realize, okay, we need to have a team,
right?
That takes time. And I lived in a hotel across the street for 74 days. I think that was right. My wife is my best friend, and there is some level of, I'm probably a little better when I have some routine in my life. We now have lived here 11 days. But I've got to find the box that has my socks and boxers in it soon, because I've wore every pair of Under Armour socks and boxers that Ben, our equipment guy, has given us, and I'm exhausted from just that. But what I've tried to do as it relates to our league is I don't want to completely pass or delegate every part of the league to the staff and me not be a part. So all of us are brand new to the Big Ten. And so what we've tried to do is kind of divide up different things to study. I know there's 4 new coaches, so study their previous team. But how can we get familiar with at least the paradigm in which they play on both ends of the floor? And with that, as we're trying to discover this month what is best for our brand new roster, what is the best way for us to play, is some of what we would learn from studying the Big Ten. Would that make adjustments on how we want to play? And so we're probably behind, to be honest, John, on that understanding just because of the transition. But over the next 6 weeks, we're going to have to give an inordinate amount of time just to catch up and kind of have a base foundational level of what that is.
And before you get to the Big Ten, you are going to have an arduous non-conference schedule. You got Georgetown at home, you're at Virginia, you're at Marquette, you got 3 games in the Players Era Festival. Is this what you think the Maryland non-conference schedule is going to look like annually under Buzz Williams beyond this season?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I've since my diatribe on not making the NCAA tournament 4 years ago, right. I guess 5 years ago now, I have differing thoughts. I have differing thoughts on, I understand the net, even though the algorithm has never been published, but it's the most important thing we're judged by. Some of these games were kind of in talks when I was hired.
Right.
Some had already been scheduled. The Players Era was part of the relationships that we had built from last year and the first one when we were at A&M. So we're thankful for that. But another piece to this, which is probably too much information, and you know this, I've never played in a conference that's played 20 games.
Right.
And so that, in my opinion, not acting as if I have the answers, I personally believe that changes the math of the net.
Yeah.
But then because you don't know who your 2-play teams are going to be right away when you're hired, you're having to make decisions on the non-conference schedule prior to knowing who your 2-play games are.
Yeah.
So I would say in year number 1, we've probably in truth overscheduled. But I do think in some ways, according to how the committee is supposed to decide, there's more risk in underscheduling than there is risk in overscheduling.
Right.
Even though on the internet they may say your win-loss record is not what it's supposed to be, that's really not how we're judged anymore. It's the quality of it. And so all coaches, or at least I do, I kind of fight back and forth internally on, okay, what's the right thing to do and when should we do it and how should we do it? And also the turnover of rosters are happening so much that sometimes you schedule who you think is going to be a quad 1 game and they end up being a quad 3 game.
Right.
And, you know, there's been some situations even in the last few years specific to who we've played. When we've played them, they were quad 1. And by the time the season was over, because they had a crazy injury or something went out of sorts, it ended up being a quad 3. And then last year, you know, we got into a lot of quad 1A scenarios. And I understand that's why 14 teams in the SEC went to the tournament. But I think we've probably overscheduled, to be truthful. But I understand that if you're willing to take a, quote, good loss, then long-term it's probably the right thing.
Buzz, what do you think it's going to be like for you emotionally when you go back to play Marquette in Milwaukee?
Yeah. Again, you know, I say no to all of this sort of stuff. This is the first time I've known you for a decade, and this is the first time I've ever done this with you. I wanted to do everything possible not to play Marquette. That's probably a little too personal, and it's not because I have any problems, man. They shouldn't have hired me. And if they don't hire me, we don't go to 3 Sweet 16s. We don't do some of the things. It doesn't lead to Virginia Tech. It doesn't lead to even this. And so, like, a lot of really good relationships, even now, with people in Wisconsin, associated with basketball, associated with Marquette, associated with the relationships, like the people that did all of the work for the vow renewal for my wife and I, they're from Wisconsin.
Wow.
So, like, Yeah, that was in the folder, like day number 1. Hey, Buzz, you got to meet with 22 people. And here's what we're going to talk about. Like meeting number 7 was the file folder that had the UVA contract without a date, the Marquette contract without a date. Colleen Sorum, who is going to SMU with Damon Evans, who was the AD here. She was the interim AD, and she was in that meeting with the, at that time, sport administrator, and they're going through all this. And I go, I know I'm older than you guys, but you think that we have to play Marquette? And do you think that we have to play at Marquette? And they're like, well, Coach, we played them last year. And I'm like, oh, well, we're going to have a hard time getting out of that. So we'll deal with it when it gets there. There's been so much emotion over the last couple of months with everything, and I'll handle it the right way. And even just talking about it, all of it is good feelings. It's all good thoughts, just humbled by all of it. So however it turns out, the game won't be about me. Coach Shaka's done an unbelievable job there, and Coach Wojo did a great job as well. So it'll end up being fun.
Buzz, what are the impressions of the roster you've put together at Maryland?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth. I think some of it, John, I don't know if we're great because we played 6 teams in the Big Ten last year at Texas A&M, so I have some familiarity. But in truth, that's the depth of knowledge that I'm comfortable with, competitively speaking. And I haven't studied enough since I've been here on Big Ten because we've been trying to put together our roster. Do I think we're great? I don't know. I would say I don't think we're bad, but I don't know if that means that we're great. I do think that we're in week 3 of the 8 weeks that we can work, and we're probably utilizing our time differently. And we've always kind of been different in the summer, no matter where we've lived. We're probably utilizing these weeks even more uniquely than we ever have, just because I think sometimes we probably overestimate talent and we underestimate discipline. And I don't want to go so fast that we make all of our decisions based on the talent, but I do want to make sure that we're installing and instilling the things that we want to be about, no matter who's on the team, whether that's in year 1 or in our futures. And so we've utilized these 3 weeks in the mornings and the afternoons a little different, while making sure we're investing not only in their lives, but in their games. But not, I'm not the one that wants to have practice in June and let's get everybody on the court and we're not at that point. And that's not us blaming or complaining. That's us wanting to make sure that we're discerning that we're going to utilize each of the skill sets we have to be the best that we can be as a unit. But while we're trying to problem solve that, so to say, we're going to invest in helping their skill set be the best they can, while also making sure that we're teaching them how we want to work, the pace at which we want to work, and the discipline in which we want to live on and off the court.
Well, the positives are, I should say, Solomon Washington and Pharrell Payne you're very familiar with because they played for you at Texas A&M last year. And Miles Rice is a proven player in college basketball, and 2 years ago was the best player on a Washington State team that made the NCAA tournament, had success. He played at Indiana last year. Outside of that troika, who do you think could have the biggest roles for Maryland next year?
Yeah, I really like Diggy. David Coit. We call him Diggy. I don't know if I'm supposed to say David Coit or Diggy Coit publicly. This is my first interview since the press conference, but I think there is some value in experience, particularly when you're going into year number 1. I love the 2 red shirts that came with us from Texas A&M. I know who they are. I've seen how they've changed their bodies, changed their mindsets. When we were putting together the roster, I don't know that this is right per se, but I didn't want everybody to be from the portal, because I think when you join that train at the very beginning, you end up maybe staying on it whether you want to or not.
No doubt.
So we tried to balance. We tried to balance the talent. We tried to balance the depth chart, but we also, and you can try, but you can't control it. We also tried to make sure from a depth as it relates to classes that we weren't going to be too top heavy. Now, do I think that we batted, so to say, 100% in each class or within the roster makeup as it relates to talent? No. I think Elijah Saunders is really good.
Yeah.
But I also think he's really good because he's a man.
Sure.
He looks like a man, but he's a man in how he lives his life. He's a man in how he competes. You can tell he's played in the Final Four. You can tell that he was at UVA with a lot of discipline. You can just tell on and off the floor. He's going to play, and he's going to impact winning, and he's going to allow you to be what you want to be as a coach and coach him the right way, and he will be a great ambassador on and off the floor. But we didn't want all seniors, and we didn't want all freshmen. I think Rakeese Passmore, who was highly touted coming out of high school, who didn't play a lot last year, there's a lot of those guys, which are why sometimes do you want to take a talented freshman and he doesn't play enough and he's in the portal. Darius Adams is an ultra talented player from Jersey, who we're very fortunate to have. Great family, great thus far in his career, has been very successful. So there's bits and pieces of their character, of their talent, of their size, of their age. We've just tried to make sure that we didn't get kind of overloaded in one area or another. But after 3 weeks, I just think Diggy has a way about him. I think fast guards are hard to guard no matter what conference they play in. And because this is his last year, he's been around the block, forwards and backwards. So I don't think anything's going to catch him off guard.
Well, you can get overloaded in this climate now in college basketball. It is crazy, especially at least until we get to the games. But, speaking of overloaded, I remember, might be, close to 15 years ago, you called me. You were at Marquette and you were curious about the television industry. And you and I had breakfast with a couple of gentlemen who at the time were representing me. And you were asking just questions about the field of broadcasting. And I remember you said at that breakfast, I have 4 kids under the age of 10. And I'm watching your press conference in Maryland, and I see 4 young adults next to you and your wife. What has it been like for you on this journey to balance basketball and family?
Well, my wife has been through the roof good. She was a really good player. That was long before I met her. And so I think in some ways she kind of knew what this life was going to be. That was slightly before I became a head coach. I was an assistant coach, I think, for 5 years in our married life before I became a head coach. I guess actually it was 6 basketball seasons before I became a head coach. And so that press conference was the only press conference of the 5 times that there's been one that all of my kids were there.
Wow.
So that was really cool to me. I know you probably saw it or saw clips of it. Yeah. I even mentioned it. We moved trains, planes, and automobiles to figure out how they could all get here because that was so important to me. I remember those conversations. I remember the people that were in those conversations. Transparently, some of those literary agents, some of those media agents, some of the publishing companies that I've talked to over the last decade. That's still very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I like learning from others and seeing if I can translate that into the world that I live in, whether I stay living in the world of coaching or not. I'm somewhat convicted, John, to be honest. Like next month, hopefully my oldest son will graduate, and my oldest daughter has already graduated, and now my youngest son is in college and playing Division III, and so now we're moving again, and there's only one child left at home. Baby's our only child left, and so it's almost backwards. I think sometimes if you really wanted to be a good assistant coach, I think the way to do that is be a head coach first.
Wow.
And then be an assistant. And then you would understand how to be a better assistant.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost reverse.
Wow.
I can still hear so many people when you start talking about the elder statesmen. Like Coach Rav knows my kids, writes my kids, they write him. I can remember Eddie Sutton saying it to me. Just countless coaches, Buzz, you're never going to get this time back. Be a good dad. And I can remember my kids not being in school going, yeah, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. And I don't necessarily think that I've been a bad dad. But now that I'm 52, going into year 32 in coaching and 19 as a head coach, and 3 of my children don't live at home, I find myself going on a walk going, well, let me just call all of them. Let me text all of them.
Right.
Because my heart is convicted that in some ways I've given a lot to other people's children and probably not done as good a job giving my best to my own children, because in a very immature way, I thought my children would always be in the house. And so I'm not an empty nester yet, but I can for sure see signs of it. And so I think that has probably allowed me to morph and evolve as some of these changes in college athletics. I probably coach a little different. One of the guys that I coached in my year at New Orleans spent a few days with us last week, and he was like, Coach, you're so soft. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm like butter soft relative to who I was when I coached you. And the next day he came to practice and our individuals, and he goes, Coach, you would have kicked me out of the gym. And I go, and you should have been kicked out of the gym. And he was like, I know, but what about this? And I go, I can't do that now, Parlo. What you're missing is there is some level of I'm still employed. Right. I wouldn't be employed if I coached these guys the way I coached you. Some of that is because you allowed it and you were tough. And some of that is I'm a little more mature than I was when I was 31 coaching you. And so things have just evolved and changed, but I've probably been okay as a dad, but in hindsight, I wish I could have been even better.
Well, we know you're going to coach your teams and get them ready to play regardless of where you're coaching, and you will embark on year 1 at Maryland next season. I'm curious, though, as we wrap this thing up, what are the biggest things that you want to accomplish during the 25-26 season in your first year in College Park?
Yeah, can we figure out how to play hard? Can we figure out how to play unselfish? Can we figure out what the priorities are on what leads to winning and what leads to losing? And can we play with incredible care for one another and passion for the institution in honor of the history that this program has had? That's what I would say it's deserving of. And I think we've got to continue to head in that direction as we go through the rest of the summer and get into the fall. Exactly what aesthetically is it going to look like? I don't know. But as it relates to our effort and all of the intangibles, I for sure hope that those things are evident when we compete in the public space.
Good stuff, Buzz. Congratulations on the job. Awesome to have you on the East Coast. And as always, look forward to staying connected throughout the season.
Hey, John, this is the first time I've ever seen you without a tie. Do you do these podcasts and you don't wear a tie?
Well, when we started this new venture, in March, Buzz, they said, John, this is going to be more casual. We don't want you wearing a tie. You're not behind a desk in the studio right now doing, pre-half and post-game. So this is
that's
a
what
little
they
looser.
say to coaches now. You can just wear a pullover. You don't have to wear a tie. And I'm like, no, you're supposed to wear a tie to be respectful to the game. And when the Zoom came on, as you know, I don't even know how to do this. I don't have a computer. But when they set it up, I was like, John's not even wearing a tie.
Yeah, they had to talk to me about that. They said, for this show, we don't want you wearing a tie. So if I,
that's part of your NIL. That's part of your branding.
That's part of my branding. I know. As I broke 40, Buzz, and now I'm going to be 42 in September, you get a little looser. You learn to be adaptable.
You look great, man. Have a good day. Thanks for allowing me to be a part.
Thank you. That's Maryland head coach Buzz Williams. I'm John Rothstein, reminding you to subscribe to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page.